What happens when entitlement and prejudice collide at 30,000 feet? On a sold-out flight from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, a distinguished black woman, a brilliant surgeon, is told her first-class ticket doesn't matter. She's ordered to give up her seat for a white passenger. The flight crew backs the aggressor, and she's forced to endure a walk of shame to the back of the plane. But they made one colossal mistake. They didn't know who she was, and more importantly, they had no idea who her husband was. What unfolds next isn't just a confrontation, it's a reckoning that will tear an airline apart and serve a dose of karma so severe it will echo from the cockpit to the boardroom. The air in the first-class cabin of Trans-American Airlines Flight 828 was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. The scent of warm towels and subtle citrus hung in the recycled air, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the terminal they had just left behind. Doctor. Annalise Thornton sank into the plush leather of seat 1A, a sigh of relief escaping her lips. It had been a grueling week in Washington, D.C. She had spent 4 days at the National Institutes of Health, presenting her team's groundbreaking research on neuroregenerative therapies. The work was her passion, a complex dance of science and hope, but it was draining. Annalise was a woman who commanded respect without ever demanding it. At 46, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of being the most capable person in nearly every room she entered. Her hands, which could deftly navigate the delicate pathways of the human brain, now rested on the sleek armrest. She had booked this specific seat, 1A, 3 months in advance. It was her ritual. The bulkhead window seat offered a semblance of privacy and a view of the curvature of the earth, a perspective that always reminded her of how small individual troubles were in the grand scheme of things. She smiled as she retrieved a well-worn copy of a poetry anthology from her leather tote bag. Her husband Henry always teased her about reading poetry after dense medical conferences. "Decompressing the frontal lobe, Annie," he'd ask, with that warm, rumbling laugh that had first captured her heart 20 years ago. Henry, he was supposed to be sitting next to her in 1B. A last-minute, non-negotiable video conference with the Secretary of Transportation had delayed him. "I'll be on the very next flight, I promise," he had told her over the phone, his voice laced with the familiar frustration of a man whose life was a series of crises to be managed. "My security will get me to Dulles as soon as I'm done. I'll probably beat you to the hotel." Annalise had simply smiled. She was used to it. Being married to the acting administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration meant sharing him with the safety of the entire nation's airspace. She was immensely proud of him, but she also cherished these quiet moments of solitude. The flight attendant, a man in his late 20s, with an overly starched collar and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, approached her. His name tag read Brent. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off, ma'am? Champagne orange juice?" "Just some sparkling water with lime." "Please," Annalise replied, her voice calm and melodious. "Of course." Brent's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the empty seat beside her, then back to her face, a micro-expression of something she couldn't quite place. Curiosity, annoyance. She dismissed it as travel fatigue, hers, not his. She settled in the hum of the boarding process, a familiar, white noise. The muffled announcements, the rumble of rolling bags on the jet bridge, the polite and sometimes not so polite negotiations for overhead bin space. She watched the other first-class passengers file in. A tech CEO in a hoodie and expensive sneakers typing furiously on his phone. An older couple dressed in matching beige travel wear who looked like they were heading off on a well-deserved retirement adventure. The cabin was nearly full when Annalise felt a presence hovering over her. She looked up from her book to see a woman in her early 50s, her face a mask of pinched impatience. She was dressed in expensive, if slightly garish, resort wear. A large diamond-encrusted K hung from a gold chain around her neck. Excuse me, the woman said, her voice sharp and nasal. I think you're in my seat. Annalise offered a polite, professional smile, the same one she used to reassure nervous patients before surgery. I don't believe so. I'm in 1A. Well, I'm in 1A, the woman snapped, waving a boarding pass printed on flimsy airport paper. So you're going to have to move. Annalise blinked slowly, maintaining her composure. This was likely a simple mix-up. Perhaps you could double-check your pass. The gate agents sometimes make errors. The woman, whose name Annalise could now see, was Karen Miller. On the boarding pass she was brandishing like a weapon, scoffed. Honey, I know how to read. This is my seat. I specifically booked it for the legroom because of my deep vein thrombosis. It's a medical condition. She said the last two words with a dramatic flair, as if announcing a terminal diagnosis. Annalise glanced at the woman's perfectly tanned, toned legs, clad in designer sandals. She kept her medical opinion to herself. Instead, she calmly pulled out her own phone, opened the Transamerican app, and displayed her digital boarding pass. The screen glowed with the undeniable confirmation: Thornton Annalise, seat 1A. As you can see, Annalise, said her voice still even, this seat is assigned to me. Perhaps yours is 1A on a different flight, or maybe 7A. Karen Miller's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The veneer of civility evaporated. Don't you patronize me. I know what I bought. You people always seem to find your way into places you don't belong. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. You people. Annalise felt a familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had in medical school when a professor questioned if she'd written a brilliant paper herself, the same feeling when a patient's family asked for a different doctor. After all her accomplishments, all her accolades in this moment, she was reduced to one thing, you people. Her composure, her shield remained intact. I'm not sure who you people are, she said, her voice now edged with ice. But I am a ticketed, confirmed passenger in this seat. I'm sure the flight attendant can clear this up. Oh, he will, Karen sneered, turning and flagging down Brent with the frantic energy of someone spotting a lifeboat. Flight attendant, this woman has stolen my seat. Brent hurried over, his practiced smile firmly back in place, though it wavered slightly when he saw the storm brewing around seat 1A. Is there a problem here, ladies? Yes, there's a problem, Karen Miller declared, positioning herself as the aggrieved party. I have a boarding pass for this seat 1A, and this woman refuses to move. She's being incredibly difficult. Brent turned to Annalise, his gaze expectant. Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass? Annalise held up her phone again, the screen clear and unambiguous. Here it is, seat 1A, booked and paid for months ago. Brent glanced at her phone, then at the flimsy paper pass in Karen's hand. Annalise expected him to scan them to check his manifest, to do the logical, procedural thing. Instead, he focused on Karen's pass. It had clearly been reprinted at the gate. A red flag for anyone familiar with airline systems, often indicating a last-minute change or standby clearance. I see, Brent said, his tone shifting. He addressed Annalise, not Karen. Ma'am, there appears to be a duplication. Sometimes the system has a glitch. It's not a glitch, Karen insisted. I have a medical need for this seat. I explained that to the gate agent, Sandra. She was very helpful. She understood, unlike some people. Her eyes darted toward Annalise. Annalise felt her heart rate quicken. This wasn't a glitch. This was a deliberate act. The gate agent, Sandra, had likely been worn down by this woman's complaining, and seeing an empty seat next to Annalise on the manifest, Henry's seat had made a unilateral, unauthorized switch, assuming the passenger in 1A wouldn't put up a fight. This isn't a simple duplication, Annalise stated firmly. My ticket was confirmed. If there was a change, I was not notified. According to your own contract of carriage, a confirmed ticketed passenger cannot be involuntarily reassigned without cause. She knew her rights. Henry had drilled the fine print of air travel regulations into her head over years of dinner conversations. Brent seemed taken aback by her knowledge. His smile faltered completely. He was clearly out of his depth, looking for the path of least resistance. And in that moment, the path of least resistance was not the calm, articulate black woman citing regulations, but the loud, demanding white woman claiming a medical ailment. "Ma'am," Brent said, his voice taking on a condescending edge, "I understand you're upset, but we have another passenger here with a documented medical need for this specific seat. We have to accommodate her." "Documented?" Annalise challenged. "Did the gate agent see a doctor's note? Or did she simply take Mrs. Miller at her word?" Karen gasped theatrically. "Are you calling me a liar? I am a Diamond Medallion member. I have flown millions of miles with this airline. Who are you? Do you even have status?" The question was designed to humiliate, to reinforce a pecking order that had nothing to do with tickets and everything to do with perceived social standing. "My status is that of a passenger who paid for this seat," Annalise said, her voice dangerously low. "And I expect the airline to honor its commitment." Other passengers were now openly staring. The tech CEO had put his phone down. The elderly couple looked on with worried expressions. A man across the aisle, a burly man with a military-style haircut, shook his head in disgust at the scene. But no one spoke up. The silence of the bystanders was its own form of poison. Brent's face hardened. He was losing control of the situation and had made his choice. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue about this. We need to close the cabin door and depart on time. The gate agent reassigned the seat. I have to honor that. I can find you another seat." "Another seat?" Annalise asked, incredulous. "First class is full. I saw the chart." Brent avoided her eyes. "We have a seat for you in the main cabin." The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. They weren't just moving her. They were downgrading her, forcing her from the seat she had paid a premium for, based on the lie of another passenger and the biased decision of the crew. "Absolutely not," Annalise said. "That is unacceptable. I want to speak to the captain." "The captain is busy with pre-flight checklists," Brent said dismissively. "He doesn't have time for seating disputes. Now, either you can take the seat I'm offering you, or we can deplane you and settle this in the terminal. If you refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, that's a federal offense. The choice is yours." It was a threat wrapped in the language of procedure. He was weaponizing the rules against her. The man with the military haircut across the aisle muttered, "This is garbage." Loud enough for a few people to hear, but not loud enough to matter. Annalise looked at Brent's smug face. She looked at Karen Miller's triumphant smirk. She looked at the other silent passengers. She could fight. She could refuse to force them to call security and make this a bigger incident. It would delay the flight for everyone. She would be painted as the angry black woman, the troublemaker. All she wanted was to go home to rest, to see her husband. A wave of profound weariness washed over her. The fight in Washington had been for science, for progress. This fight felt primal, ugly, and deeply, deeply exhausting. With a dignity that felt like a physical weight, Annalise stood up. She gathered her book and her tote bag, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She didn't look at Karen Miller, who was already eagerly moving to claim her prize. She looked directly at Brent. "You should know," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the quiet cabin, "that you are making a grave mistake." Brent just gestured vaguely towards the back of the plane. "Your new seat is 24B, middle." To be middle. The final indignity. As Annalise Thornton, a world-renowned neurosurgeon, began the long walk of shame down the aisle from the rarefied air of first class to the cramped confines of economy, she felt the stares of every passenger. Some were pitying, some contemptuous, most just relieved that the drama was over and that they would be taking off on time. She found 24B wedged between a college student who had already kicked off his shoes and a man who took up his entire seat, and then some. She squeezed into the narrow space, her knees pressed against the seat in front of her. She buckled the seatbelt and stared blankly at the plastic tray table, her mind a maelstrom of humiliation and fury. She took out her phone. She had one text to send before they made her turn it to airplane mode. A text to the only person in the world who would understand the full scope of the injustice. To Henry, they moved me. A woman lied, and they gave her my seat. I'm in 24B. I have never been so humiliated. Please, hurry. She hit send just as the main cabin door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Outside, the engines began to whine, spooling up for a journey she now wished she wasn't on. In seat 1A, Karen Miller accepted a glass of champagne from Brent and toasted her victory. The call was a nightmare made of maps and weather patterns. Inside a sterile soundproofed conference room deep within the Department of Transportation headquarters, Henry Thornton stared at a massive screen displaying the airspace over the central United States. A sprawling, angry blotch of red and yellow, a supercell thunderstorm complex, was squatting over the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, one of the nation's most critical air traffic hubs. The ground stop at DFW is now entering its third hour. A meteorologist from the National Weather Service was saying grimly, "We're seeing diversions as far as Denver and Atlanta. The ripple effect is going to be felt on both coasts within the hour." Henry listened, his mind a whirring calculator of logistics and consequences. On the screen, tiny icons representing hundreds of commercial flights were rerouted, put into holding patterns, or cancelled outright. Each icon represented hundreds of passengers' stories and disrupted lives. It was his world, a grand three-dimensional chess game played at 500 miles per hour, and he was one of its most senior arbiters. "Mr. Secretary," Henry said, directing his voice to the main screen where the Secretary of Transportation's face was framed, "my recommendation is that we proactively cancel the next 2 departure banks out of Chicago and Atlanta, bound for the affected sector. It'll be painful up front, but it will prevent a systemic gridlock that could take 2 days to untangle." His gaze drifted for a split second to a small silver-framed photo on the corner of the polished conference table. It was Annalise, smiling at him on a beach in Hawaii, the wind catching her hair. She was his anchor, his peace. The thought of her waiting for him already on her plane was a small, warm light in the cold operational calculus of the moment. He had promised her he wouldn't be long, a promise that was being broken with every passing minute. The secretary finally nodded. "Do it, Henry. Give the order. Better a controlled bleed than a catastrophic hemorrhage." "Yes, sir." With a few more clipped exchanges, the conference call ended. The moment the screen went dark, Henry was on his feet, shrugging on his suit jacket. "David," he said to his lead security agent, a stoic man who had been waiting patiently by the door, "time is not our friend. My wife's flight was scheduled to depart 10 minutes ago. Get me to Dulles, now." "Car is on the tarmac, sir," David replied, already speaking into his wrist communicator as they strode through the hushed, secure hallways. "Raptor is mobile. ETA, 5 minutes to the gate." The transition from the silent, pressurized world of the command center to the raw power of the airfield was instantaneous. They bypassed the public terminals, entirely emerging from a service door into the deafening roar of a 777 taxiing nearby. A black government-issue SUV was waiting, its engine humming. As they sped across the intricate web of taxiways, the radio in the car crackled to life with clipped coded chatter. Henry barely heard it. He stared out the window at the ballet of ground crews and baggage carts, the massive tails of airliners from around the world piercing the hazy afternoon sky. He felt a familiar pang of guilt. Annalise was so patient with the demands of his job, with the cancelled dinners and postponed vacations. She understood the weight of his responsibilities, but he hated being the reason for the slightest shadow of disappointment on her face. He pulled out his phone, intending to send a quick text. "Finally on my way," but there was already a message from her sent just minutes ago. His heart skipped a beat. She rarely texted right before takeoff. He opened it. To Henry, They moved me. A woman lied, and they gave her my seat. I'm in 24B. I have never been so humiliated. Please hurry. Henry read the message once, then a second time. The words didn't seem to compute. They moved me. 24B. He knew their seats. 1A and 1B. First class. A bulkhead he'd specifically chosen for her comfort after a long week. 24B was economy. A middle seat, no less. Humiliated. The word struck him like a physical blow. Annalise did not use such words lightly. She was the most poised, resilient person he knew. For her to admit to humiliation meant the incident must have been agonizing. A cold, controlled fury began to replace the ambient stress of his job. The national airspace crisis suddenly seemed insignificant, a distant problem. The only thing that mattered was the injustice happening to one person, his person, inside a metal tube just a few hundred yards away. "David," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Step on it." The SUV screeched to a halt at the base of the jet bridge for Flight 8208. The ground crew was already preparing to pull it back. A ramp supervisor held up a hand, looking annoyed at the unscheduled vehicle. David was out of the car before it fully stopped flashing his credentials. "FAA. Hold this bridge. We have a passenger boarding." The supervisor squinted, confused. "Sir, the flight is sealed. The manifest is closed. We're on final for pushback." At the top of the jet bridge, the gate agent, a woman with a name tag reading Sandra, was already closing the heavy door. She looked down, her expression a mixture of panic and exasperation. Henry was already out of the vehicle, taking the metal stairs two at a time. "That flight is not pushing back," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the tarmac. He arrived at the top of the bridge, his eyes locking with Sandra's. "My name is Henry Thornton. I'm the acting administrator of the FAA. You are going to open that door." Sandra's jaw dropped. She had been the one to make the switch. The woman, Karen Miller, had been relentless, complaining about her non-existent booking for 1A, waving her diamond medallion status like a scepter, and claiming a vague but urgent-sounding medical issue. Seeing the empty seat, 1B on the manifest next to Dr. Thornton, Sandra had made a field decision, reprinting a pass for Mrs. Miller, and assuming the woman in 1A, who had been so quiet and polite, wouldn't cause a scene. It was the path of least resistance. Now that path had led her to a direct confrontation with one of the most powerful men in the entire industry. "Sir, The captain has already been given clearance," she stammered, holding the phone connected to the cockpit. "Then, tell the captain to revoke it." Henry commanded, his gaze unyielding. He leaned in slightly. "Or I will." A terrified squeak was the only reply. Sandra spoke frantically into the phone. A moment later, a heavy click-clack echoed from the aircraft, and the door swung inward. The flight attendant, Brent, stood there, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. "Sir, I'm sorry, but boarding is closed," he began, reciting the line from his manual. "You're holding for one more passenger," Henry said, stepping past him into the galley. Without breaking stride, "Me!" He entered the first-class cabin, his eyes immediately going to the front row. He expected to see Annalise, perhaps with her book in her lap, her face lighting up with relief when she saw him. Instead, he saw a stranger, a woman in garish resort, where her face, a mask of smug satisfaction, was settled comfortably in seat 1A, a half-empty glass of champagne on her tray table. Seat 1B, his seat was empty. The sight stopped him cold. It was one thing to read the text. It was another to see the visual proof of the humiliation Annalise described. The woman in her seat, his wife, somewhere in the back, in 24B. He turned to Brent, his face a granite mask. The shift in his demeanor was terrifying. The concerned husband was gone, replaced by the full authority of his office. "Where is my wife?" he asked, his voice low and laced with steel. "Dr. Annalise Thornton. She was ticketed in this seat." 1A. Brent's professional smile dissolved. He looked at the powerful man in the tailored suit, then at the name Thornton, and then his mind flashed back to the elegant, dignified black woman he had just summarily dismissed and banished to the back of the plane. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt as if the floor of the aircraft had just fallen away. "Sir," he began, his own voice, now a weak, reedy thing. "There was an issue, a seating duplication in the system, a mix-up. We had to accommodate another passenger." "A duplication," Henry repeated, letting the word hang in the air like an indictment. "You're telling me that my wife's ticket, confirmed for months, was duplicated by a passenger holding a flimsy boarding pass reprinted at the gate just before departure? Is that the mix-up you're referring to?" Karen Miller, utterly oblivious to the cataclysm unfolding, decided this was the moment to assert herself. "Excuse me, can we please get this show on the road?" she huffed, looking at Henry with disdain. "I don't know who you are, but some of us have paid a lot of money to be on this flight, and we'd like to actually fly. This delay is ridiculous." Henry slowly turned his head, fixing her with a gaze so cold it could have frosted the cabin windows. "Ma'am, believe me when I tell you your flight is the last thing you need to be concerned with right now." He turned back to the ashen-faced Brent. "Get me the pilot in command. I want to see Captain Riggs in this cabin immediately, and bring me the original unedited flight manifest. Now." "The captain is preparing for takeoff, sir. He's—" Brent Henry interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more menace than a shout. "Do I look like a man who is open to negotiation? Get him." Brent practically fled toward the cockpit. A palpable tension fell over the first-class cabin. Phones were being surreptitiously raised. The other passengers knew they were witnessing something far beyond a simple delay. Captain David Riggs emerged a moment later, the 4 stripes on his epaulettes seeming to grant him an aura of invincibility. He was in his late 50s, accustomed to his word being law in his domain. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Captain Riggs," he said, his tone clipped and annoyed. "While I appreciate your position at the FAA, I cannot hold this aircraft on the ground for a seating dispute. My crew informed me the issue was handled." "Handled?" Henry's laugh was short and devoid of humor. "Captain, your crew, under your command, illegally removed a confirmed passenger from her paid seat on the basis of another passenger's unsubstantiated claims. They then downgraded her, a black woman, to a middle seat in economy to accommodate a white passenger. They threatened her with federal charges when she attempted to assert her rights. All of this happened on your aircraft, on your watch." He took a step closer, lowering his voice for effect. "This isn't a seating dispute, Captain. This is a flagrant violation of U.S. Code, Title 49. It is discrimination, plain and simple. I have a text message right here from my wife, Dr. Annalise Thornton, describing her humiliation. So, you are not going to stand there and tell me this was handled?" Captain Riggs's face went slack, the color draining from it. The confidence, the command, the invincibility. It all vanished, replaced by the dawning, horrific understanding of his situation. Henry Thornton looked past him, his eyes boring into Brent. "Now for the last time, go and get my wife. Bring her back to her seat." Brent stood frozen for a moment in the galley, the force of Henry Thornton's command hitting him like a physical shockwave. Every instinct screamed at him to disappear, to melt into the bulkhead, but the piercing gaze of the FAA administrator pinned him in place. There was no escape. He turned his body, moving with the jerky, unnatural gait of a man being marched to his own execution. The walk down the aisle was the longest of his life. The same path Annalise had taken. In shame, he now walked in terror. The faces of the passengers, once blank or annoyed, were now alight with rapt attention. They knew. Everyone knew. He could feel their judgment like 1,000 tiny needles on his skin. He passed the emergency exit rows, his mind numbly recalling the safety speech he was supposed to give, a speech about responsibility and composure in a crisis. He had failed the very first test, a crisis of character, not of mechanics. He reached row 24. Annalise was sitting perfectly still, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. She was looking straight ahead, not at him as if she had been expecting him. The college student beside her had his phone angled downward, almost certainly recording, while the large man on the other side seemed to shrink into his seat, trying to become invisible. Dr. Thornton Brent's voice came out as a pathetic croak. He cleared his throat and tried again, the practiced politeness of his flight attendant, training sounding grotesque and absurd even to his own ears. Dr. Thornton, ma'am, there has been a very serious misunderstanding up front. Please, Mr. Thornton is here. He's asking for you. Your seat is available. Annalise turned her head slowly, and her eyes met his. There was no triumph in them, no gloating. I told you so. There was something far more unnerving, a profound, sorrowful disappointment. It was the look of a teacher watching her most promising student fail a simple test. In that moment, Brent felt his soul shrivel. He wasn't just in trouble with his employer or a federal agency. He had fundamentally failed a test of human decency, and this woman, his victim, knew it. Annalise's internal world was a quiet storm. When Brent had appeared, a small bitter part of her had wanted to see him grovel. But looking at his terrified, pale face, she felt only a deep, weary sadness. This whole ugly affair wasn't about this one man's weakness. It was about a system that empowered it. Her victory, if it could be called that, felt hollow. It shouldn't have required the chief of the FAA to get the seat she had paid for. But the principle had to be defended. Without a word, she unbuckled her seatbelt. With the same unhurried grace she had shown when she was forced to leave, she stood up and stepped into the aisle. Her procession back to the front was a spectacle of silent reversal. The power dynamic of the entire aircraft had been inverted. Passengers who had previously ignored her now leaned away from the aisle as if to clear a path for royalty. People made eye contact, then quickly looked away, their faces tinged with a mixture of awe and shame for their own prior silence. She saw the man with the military haircut, Mr. Henderson, who gave her a slow, deliberate nod of profound respect. She returned it with a flicker of a grateful smile. This wasn't a walk of shame or a walk of victory. It was a walk of vindication, and every passenger on board was her witness. As she re-entered the first-class cabin, the scene was frozen in a tense tableau. Captain Riggs stood ramrod straight, his face ashen. Henry was a pillar of controlled fury, and Karen Miller was still in seat 1A, though the smugness had been replaced by a dawning, panicked horror. Annalise's eyes found Henry's. The world narrowed to just the two of them. In his gaze she saw it all, his love, his protective rage, his relief that she was safe. A single tear that she hadn't realized was welling finally escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. He took a half step toward her, a silent question. "Are you all right?" She gave him the faintest of nods, a silent answer. "I am now." He gently guided her the final few feet, stopping directly in front of seat 1A. Karen Miller, seeing Annalise standing before her, seemed to snap out of her stupor. She scrambled for one last desperate tactic, false contrition. She looked up at Annalise, her face contorting into a mask of syrupy concern. "Oh my goodness, Dr. Thornton, is it?" She began, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I am so sorry about all this. It was just a silly mix-up with the gate agent. If I had known, I never would have. We could have sorted this out." Annalise looked down at the woman who had publicly humiliated her, who had called her "you people," and who was now attempting to rewrite history with a saccharine apology. Annalise didn't need to say a word. She simply held Karen's gaze, her expression unreadable, but utterly dismissive. Her silence was more powerful than any rebuke. It denied Karen the engagement she craved, rendering her pathetic attempt at reconciliation completely void. Henry stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Annalise's arm and addressing Karen as one might address a piece of luggage that needed to be moved. Says Hades. Miller, your opportunity to sort this out ended when you chose to lie and bully your way into a seat that wasn't yours. Your journey on this aircraft is over. You can't just throw me off. Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. I have rights. I'm a Diamond Medallion member. I'll sue. Your rights as a passenger are conditional upon your adherence to the contract of carriage and federal regulations, both of which you have violated. Henry stated, his voice flat and clinical. He turned his head slightly toward his security agent, who had been standing discreetly in the galley. David, please escort Mrs. Miller from the aircraft. Take her statement on the jet bridge and inform her that she will be met by airport authorities. Transamerican will be pressing charges for creating a disturbance and interfering with a flight crew. David, a large and imposing man, moved with quiet efficiency. Ma'am, please gather your personal belongings. Let's go. Defeated Karen Miller fumbled for her purse. As she stood, she shot one last venomous glare at Annalise, a look of pure, undiluted hatred. Annalise met it with calm indifference. As David led the whimpering, sputtering woman down the jet bridge, the cabin door closed behind her, with a definitive thud sealing her fate. With the immediate disruption removed, Henry turned his full, undivided attention to the two men in uniform. He was no longer just a husband. He was the administrator, and this was his courtroom. Captain Riggs. He began, his voice low and carrying to every corner of the silent cabin. You wear 4 stripes on your shoulder. They signify the highest level of command, trust, and responsibility in civil aviation. Passengers board this aircraft believing the person in the cockpit is a consummate professional capable of sound judgment under pressure. Today, you proved that belief to be misplaced. He took a step closer. You did not investigate. You did not seek the facts. You took the word of your subordinate, who himself took the word of a disruptive passenger over the clear, verifiable evidence presented by my wife. You allowed your authority to be used to enforce an act of discrimination. You are the pilot in command, Captain. The failure of this crew is your failure. The disgrace of this moment is your disgrace. He then shifted his gaze to Brent, who looked as if he might faint. And you are the face of the airline, the first line of defense for both safety and service. You were presented with a conflict, and you made a choice. It was not a procedural choice, it was a moral one. You chose to placate the loud, entitled aggressor and punish the quiet, dignified victim. You saw a white woman making demands and a black woman holding a valid ticket, and you sided with the demands over the facts. You then had the audacity to threaten Dr. Thornton with federal law, weaponizing the very regulations you were actively violating. That isn't just poor service, Brent. It's a profound abuse of your position. The finality in his voice was absolute. Here is what will happen now. This flight is grounded until a new crew arrives. You two will deplane immediately. You will surrender your company identification and your FAA-issued airman and flight attendant certificates to my agent David before you step foot on that jet bridge. You are both suspended, effective immediately. A formal FAA investigation into your conduct will begin Monday morning. But let me save you the suspense. He paused, letting the weight of his next words crush them. Your careers in commercial aviation are over. Having delivered the verdict, Henry turned to the stunned passengers. His tone softened slightly, becoming one of formal apology. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the FAA, I sincerely apologize for this significant delay. It was caused by a complete and unacceptable failure of the crew to uphold the standards of their profession and the laws of this country. A new crew is being assembled, and we will get you to San Francisco as safely and quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience. He then walked to Annalise, who had already settled into her rightful seat in 1A. He sat down beside her in B, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. The FAA administrator receded, and the husband returned. He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. The public reckoning was over. The private healing was beginning. "Are you okay, Annie?" He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. "I am now." "Henry," she breathed. "I am now." Across the aisle, Mr. Henderson, the man with the military haircut, leaned forward slightly. He caught Henry's eye and spoke in a low, respectful voice that was not meant for anyone else. "Sir," he said, giving a small, sharp nod. "That wasn't just for your wife. That was for every person who's ever been told to sit down and shut up. Thank you." The story of Trans-American Flight 828 did not conclude when a new somber flight crew finally guided the aircraft into the night sky toward San Francisco. What happened in the hushed, pressurized environment of that first-class cabin was merely the catalyst. The real consequences, the true unraveling karma, began to cascade across the country in the hours and days that followed, a testament to the fact that actions have echoes, and sometimes those echoes build into a tidal wave. The first tremor was felt at 6:05 a.m. The next morning, in a sun-drenched penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, Richard Sterling, the silver-haired CEO of Trans-American Airlines, was savoring his first cup of Kona coffee while scanning a promising pre-market stock report. His phone, a private line reserved for board members and critical government contacts, buzzed with an unlisted number. "Sterling." He answered, his voice smooth and confident. "Mr. Sterling, this is Henry Thornton." The name needed no introduction. The voice was flat, devoid of pleasantries, and carried the chill of an Arctic wind. "I was a passenger on your flight 828 from Dulles last night, or rather I was forced to become one." Richard Sterling felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Mr. Administrator, I wasn't aware. I hope the flight was satisfactory." "It was not," Henry replied, his voice a blade. "It was a masterclass in systemic failure, gross negligence, and what I can only describe as willful discrimination. I personally witnessed your captain and flight attendant, in violation of federal law, remove my wife, Dr. Annalise Thornton, from her legally purchased seat to placate a belligerent and deceitful passenger. Your crew demonstrated a complete failure of character judgment and command. Consider this your official notification. The Federal Aviation Administration is opening a full top-to-bottom investigation into Trans-American's training protocols, hiring practices, and its handling of passenger discrimination complaints, effective immediately." Sterling struggled to speak. "Henry, I am horrified. This is the first I'm hearing of it. We will cooperate fully, of course. We will terminate the crew involved. You will do more than that, Richard." Henry interrupted the use of Sterling's first name, making the threat even more personal. "You will fix the broken culture that allowed this to happen. I suggest you get ahead of this story. It's going to be a rough day for you." The line went dead. Sterling didn't have to wait long. By 9 a.m., his head of public relations burst into his office, her face pale. The college student's video from row 24 had hit TikTok and Twitter. Dubbed, "Karen Gets a Doctor Deplaned," or so she thought. It was exploding. By noon, the second video surfaced, a clearer shot from first class, showing Henry Thornton's calm, devastating takedown of the crew. The internet erupted. Catch fly. The prejudiced skies trended globally. Memes were created showing Brent offering a middle seat in economy as a customer service solution. The airline stock, which had looked so promising that morning, began to hemorrhage value. It plunged 12 points by the closing bell, a staggering loss of nearly $1 billion in market capitalization. The brand, built over decades, was being dismantled in a matter of hours by a firestorm of digital outrage. For Captain David Riggs, the end came not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of a courier envelope on his mahogany desk. He was in his home study, surrounded by a lifetime of aviation achievements, model airplanes, framed photos of him in various cockpits, a plaque for 25 years of service. The official letter from Transamerican's chief pilot was brutally concise. He was terminated, effective immediately. Tucked inside was a second letter from the FAA. His pilot's license, the very core of his identity, was suspended indefinitely, pending the results of an investigation that they both knew was a formality. The report cited his reckless disregard for the duties of a pilot in command and a demonstrated failure to investigate and prevent an act of discrimination on his aircraft. The room, once a shrine to his success, now felt like a mausoleum for his career. For Brent, the reckoning was a slower, more grinding humiliation. Fired, and with his flight attendant certificate revoked, he was blacklisted from the industry. After months of unemployment, he took the only job he could find, working the counter at a budget car rental agency at Dulles Airport. Every day, he watched the planes he could no longer board take off and land. The final bitter twist came 6 months into the job. A businessman, tapping his credit card on the counter, looked up and squinted. "Hey, I know you," the man said. "You're the guy from that video, the flight attendant. Wow." He didn't say it with malice, but with a kind of detached curiosity that was somehow worse. Brent just stared back the cheap polyester of his new uniform, feeling coarse and heavy against his skin, and muttered, "That'll be $49.95 for the insurance, sir." The digital mob that dismantled Transamerican's reputation was even more merciless to Karen Miller. Her full name, clearly visible in a screenshot of a news report, was all they needed. Within hours, she was identified as a high-end real estate agent in Arlington, Virginia. Her agency's Yelp and Google profiles were flooded with one-star reviews and comments referencing the video. Her photo was everywhere. Her managing broker called her on a Saturday morning. "Karen, we have to let you go. Our reputation is everything. You've become a liability we can't afford." Her deep vein thrombosis claim was publicly ridiculed and debunked by medical professionals on Twitter, who noted her perfectly healthy stride onto and off of the aircraft. The diamond medallion status she had wielded as a weapon was publicly revoked by Richard Sterling himself during his groveling apology press conference. She received a certified letter from Transamerican's legal department, informing her she was banned for life from the airline and its partners. Her country club membership was suspended for review due to conduct unbecoming a member a suspension from which it would never return. Her social circle, built on the fragile foundations of wealth and status, evaporated overnight. She sold her house in a panic and moved to Florida, but the infamy of the internet followed her. She was no longer Karen Miller, successful realtor. She was Airplane Karen, a permanent digital ghost of her own making. Amid the fallout, Annalise and Henry Thornton chose a different path. A week after the incident, they stood before a bank of cameras. Henry was there in silent support, but the podium belonged to Annalise. She spoke not with anger, but with the calm diagnostic precision of the surgeon she was. "What I experienced was not an isolated event," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It was a symptom of a wider disease. It is the casual dehumanization that countless people of color face every day in spaces where they are made to feel they do not belong. This was never about a single airplane seat. It was about the assumption that my dignity was negotiable and my rights were secondary. Vengeance will not cure this disease. Only change will." Behind the scenes, Henry had leveraged the full power of his office. Transamerican, desperate to stanch the bleeding, offered a massive private settlement. Annalise refused. Instead, she instructed Henry to make a different demand. In lieu of any personal damages, Transamerican Airlines would establish and endow a $25 million scholarship fund. It would be named the Dr. Annalise Thornton STEM Scholarship, dedicated to funding the education of women of color and students from underrepresented communities pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Furthermore, Henry used the incident as a political battering ram. He pushed through a new set of federal regulations that became known colloquially as the Thornton Rule. It mandated rigorous scenario-based anti-bias and de-escalation training for all flight crews to be renewed annually. Most importantly, it established a zero-tolerance policy tying any verified act of crew-led discrimination directly to the immediate and permanent revocation of their FAA-issued licenses. The message was unequivocal: prejudice was now a career-ending offense. The incident on Flight 828 faded from the headlines, but its legacy was etched into the very fabric of the aviation industry. It became a cautionary tale of how privilege, when confronted by integrity, can collapse under its own weight. It was a story of hard karma delivered not by fate, but by consequence, proving that sometimes the arc of the moral universe doesn't just bend toward justice, it is wrenched in that direction by those who refuse to be moved. The story of Dr. Annalise Thornton isn't just a drama that played out inside an airplane. It's a powerful reflection of our world. It's about the quiet dignity that confronts loud prejudice and the silent strength that weathers public humiliation. But most of all, it's a story about accountability. It shows that sometimes karma doesn't wait for the next life. It arrives on the next flight, wearing a suit and carrying the full weight of the law. What happened to Karen Miller's Brent and Captain Riggs wasn't just bad luck. It was the direct, inevitable consequence of their choices. Their story serves as a stark reminder that your character is defined by how you treat people when you think you have all the power. What would you have done in that situation, as a passenger? As Dr. Thornton, let us know in the comments below. If this story of justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with others, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final verdict.